There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the plain clothes of a Tuesday afternoon, the unassuming quiet of a half-empty coffee shop, and they don't announce themselves with thunder or lightning. They simply slide into place. A key turning in a lock you had forgotten was even there. For 13 years, the door to a certain room in my heart had been closed. I had decorated the hallway outside it, hung new pictures, changed the lighting, convinced myself the door was just a feature of the architecture, a relic of a past design. I never tried the handle. I never knocked. And then, on a Tuesday that smelled of rain and roasted coffee beans, the door was simply opened from the other side. And there he was, standing in the frame just as I remembered him, only broader in the shoulders and with the faint, weary lines of a life I knew nothing about etched around his eyes. His name was Leo. It still is, of course, but for over a decade, it had been a name spoken only in the quietest chambers of my memory. It was a name tied to the scent of chlorine, the burn of summer asphalt, the bittersweet taste of cheap convenience store slushies, and the paralyzing, electric shock of a first kiss in the back seat of a borrowed car. He was a ghost I had learned to live with, a phantom limb that only ached when the weather changed. And then he was real, standing by the sugar station, stirring a wooden stick in a paper cup with an intensity that suggested he was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room with the casual, searching air of someone waiting for a business meeting, and his eyes met mine. For a single, suspended beat of time, there was nothing, just a flicker of polite, stranger-to-stranger acknowledgement. But then, recognition dawned, slow and uncertain at first, like the sun burning through a thick morning fog. It widened his eyes, slackened his jaw. His name formed on my lips without a sound, a prayer I hadn't realized I was still holding. Julian? His voice. It was deeper, roughened slightly around the edges by 13 years of meetings and phone calls and arguments I couldn't imagine, but the core of it, the melody, was the same. It was the same voice that had dared me to climb the water tower, that had whispered jokes during calculus, that had said my name with a kind of breathless wonder right before he leaned in and changed the entire trajectory of my 17th year. My own voice felt like a stranger in my throat, a rusty hinge I had to force open. Leo. Hey. The world seemed to shrink until it was only the 4 feet of worn floorboards between us. He took a hesitant step, then another, his coffee forgotten on the counter. A smile, tentative and filled with a disbelief that perfectly mirrored my own, began to form on his face. He was my first kiss at 17, a secret I had packed away like a pressed flower in a heavy book. And he was the last person I expected to see at 30, standing in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the photography studio I had poured my entire life into building. He was a story I had told myself was over, the final chapter written and the book placed on a high shelf. But as he closed the distance between us, his smile growing more certain, more real, I felt the unmistakable sensation of a page turning. Our story, the one that truly mattered, began the way so many do in small towns, with boredom and the shared geography of high school. I was the quiet one, the observer, the boy who carried a beat-up film camera everywhere and saw the world in frames and apertures, in light and shadow. I was more comfortable in the darkroom, watching images slowly emerge from the chemical bath, than I was in the bright, noisy chaos of the cafeteria. I found solace in the silence of creation, in the patient, methodical process of capturing a moment and making it permanent. My world was internal, a carefully curated gallery of feelings and observations that I rarely shared. I was, by nature, a fortress, and I had spent years reinforcing the walls, making sure the gates were secure. Leo was the opposite of a fortress. He was an open field in a thunderstorm, all energy and light and crackling, unpredictable power. He was the star of the swim team, a creature of disciplined motion and explosive force. In the water, he was poetry, a seamless union of muscle and will that cut through the pool with a grace that mesmerized me. I used to sit in the bleachers during his practices, my camera in my lap, pretending to be studying but really just watching him. This boy who seemed to contain all the life and confidence that I lacked. Out of the water, he was just as kinetic, a whirlwind of easy laughter, casual friendships, and a restless energy that seemed to keep him in perpetual motion. He was the sun, and I was a planet caught in his orbit, content to circle at a safe distance, warmed by his light, but terrified of getting too close and burning up completely. We became friends through a shared art class, a required credit he was taking to balance out his athletic schedule. He'd sit beside me, smelling faintly of chlorine even hours after practice, and watch me sketch with a kind of focused curiosity. He couldn't draw a straight line to save his life, a fact he found endlessly amusing, but he was fascinated by the way I could. He'd ask questions, not to be polite, but because he genuinely wanted to understand. He wanted to know why I chose a certain kind of charcoal, why I shaded one area darker than another, how I could see a face in a blank sheet of paper. He was the first person who ever looked at my private world and didn't just see a hobby, but saw a language. He wanted to learn how to speak it. Our friendship was built in those quiet moments, a bridge constructed between his world of roaring crowds and starting pistols and my world of silent darkrooms and the patient click of a shutter. We were an unlikely pair, the athlete and the artist, the kinetic and the still. But it worked. He drew me out of my shell, pulling me into the orbit of his social life, introducing me to people, making me feel seen. In return, I offered him a place of quiet. He'd come to my house after a grueling practice, exhausted and spent, and we'd just sit in my room, not talking for hours. He'd lie on my floor, staring at the ceiling, his powerful body finally at rest, and I'd sit at my desk, editing photos, the soft clicks of my mouse a comforting rhythm between us. I was his harbor, the calm water where he could drop anchor and be still. He never had to perform for me. He never had to be the star swimmer or the popular guy. With me, he could just be Leo, tired and human and real. And, of course, I fell in love with him. It wasn't a sudden, crashing wave. It was a tide, slow and inexorable, rising so gradually that I didn't realize I was submerged until the water was already over my head. It was in the way he'd lean his head back and laugh, a genuine, uninhibited sound that made my chest ache. It was in the fierce loyalty he showed, defending my quiet nature to his louder friends. It was in the casual touches, a hand on my shoulder, a playful shove, the way our knees would press together when we sat in the cramped booth of a diner. Each touch was a small spark on my skin, and I began to live for them, cataloging them in my mind like precious photographs. I kept my feelings locked away in the deepest, most secure vault of my heart. He was my best friend. That was a gift too valuable to risk, a delicate ecosystem too perfect to disturb with the clumsy weight of my own selfish wanting. I would rather have him as a friend for the rest of my life than risk losing him entirely for the fleeting, impossible chance of something more. The kiss happened on a humid night in late July, the summer before our senior year. We were at a party at Miller's Pond, a sprawling, chaotic affair with a bonfire spitting sparks into the star-dusted sky and music thumping from someone's car stereo. I hated parties, but Leo had wanted to go, and where Leo went, I followed. I spent most of the night at the periphery, nursing a single warm beer, my camera a familiar shield in my hands. Leo, as always, was at the center of it all, a laughing, magnetic force. But I noticed he kept looking for me, his eyes finding mine across the fire, a small, reassuring smile on his lips that said, "I know you're here. We're in this together." Later, a few of us ended up in the back seat of Mark Peterson's beat-up sedan, ostensibly to escape the mosquitoes. Someone started a game of truth or dare. It was stupid, juvenile, but fueled by cheap beer and summer night recklessness, we played along. The dares were harmless. Go talk to that girl, steal a lawn gnome, chug a soda. Then, it was Leo's turn. Sarah Jenkins, who had been trying to get his attention all summer, dared him. Her voice was syrupy sweet, laced with challenge. "I dare you to kiss the person you find most beautiful here." A hush fell over the small group. Everyone knew who she meant. Sarah herself, with her perfect blonde hair and cheerleader smile. It was a setup, a public coronation. Leo looked at her, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, annoyance, maybe even panic. He hated being cornered. I felt a familiar pang of sympathy for him, mixed with the bitter, acidic taste of my own jealousy. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird wanting out. I started to look away, unable to watch him lean over and kiss her, to see the story I had told myself about us finally, definitively proven to be a fantasy. But he didn't move toward her. Instead, his gaze slid away from Sarah, traveling past the others in the car, and landed, with a terrifying, impossible weight, on me. The air in the car became thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. The distant party music seemed to fade into a dull, thudding pulse that matched the rhythm of my own blood. He didn't smile. He didn't look like he was joking. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light filtering through the dusty car window. It felt like an eternity passed in that silence, an entire lifetime of unspoken things hanging between us. He leaned across the seat. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to laugh it off, to break the spell. But I was paralyzed. I was a photograph being developed, held suspended in a chemical solution, waiting to see what image would emerge. His hand came up, not to my face, but to my arm, a gentle, anchoring touch just above my elbow. He smelled of bonfire smoke and the faint, clean scent of the night air. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a performance for the others. It was soft and hesitant and breathtakingly real. It was a question and an answer all at once. It lasted for maybe 5 seconds, but it recalibrated my entire universe. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, searching mine for something I couldn't name. The car was utterly silent. Sarah Jenkins was staring, her mouth agape. Then Leo, without a word to anyone, opened the car door and got out, disappearing into the darkness. We never talked about it. Not once. The next day, it was as if it had never happened. He was the same Leo, laughing and easygoing. But something had shifted between us. A new, invisible wall had been erected. The casual touches stopped. The comfortable silences became strained. We were still friends, but the language we had shared was suddenly foreign. I was too afraid to ask, and he was too skilled at avoiding it. I think, in his own way, he was just as terrified as I was. He had done something impulsive, something honest, and the honesty of it had scared him back into the safety of pretending. We limped through the rest of the summer and into senior year, two ghosts haunting the memory of a friendship that had once been so solid. When it came time for college, we chose different paths that took us to opposite ends of the country. He had a swimming scholarship to a big university in California. I was accepted into a prestigious art school in New York. We promised to stay in touch, the way everyone does. We called a few times, sent a few awkward, stilted emails. But the distance was a relief, a welcome excuse to let the cord between us finally fray and snap. The unspoken thing, the memory of that kiss, was a chasm between us that neither of us knew how to cross. It was easier to just let go. And so we did. 13 years passed. I built a life, a career. I had other relationships, other heartbreaks. I convinced myself that he was just a chapter, a poignant but finished part of my story. Until he was standing in front of me, real and solid and impossibly present, holding a cooling cup of coffee and looking at me like he'd just seen a ghost. That first meeting back was a clumsy dance of pleasantries and careful questions. We navigated the 13-year gap with the caution of two people crossing a frozen lake, testing the ice with each sentence. He was in town for work, a consulting gig for a tech firm downtown. He'd been living here for almost 6 months. The thought that he had been breathing the same city air as me for half a year, without me knowing, sent a strange jolt through my system. He asked about my photography. I told him about my studio, the commercial work that paid the bills, and the personal projects that fed my soul. He looked genuinely impressed, proud even, and that old, familiar warmth bloomed in my chest. I asked about his swimming. He laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. God, no. I haven't competed in years. Blew out my shoulder my junior year of college. That was the end of that. There was a shadow in his eyes when he said it, the ghost of a different life, a different future. I suddenly saw him not as the golden boy of my memory, but as a man who had known failure, who had been forced to reinvent himself. He was a consultant now, he said. He traveled constantly, lived out of a suitcase, managed teams, solved problems for other people. It sounded exhausting. It sounded lonely. He looked tired, the confident energy I remembered now thinned, stretched taut over a frame of weariness. He had a girlfriend, he mentioned it casually, a woman named Chloe. They'd been together for 2 years. My heart did a slow, painful clench, an involuntary reflex I had no control over. It was a stupid reaction. Of course he had a girlfriend. Why wouldn't he? But it felt like a door quietly clicking shut. We exchanged numbers. He promised to call, to see my studio sometime. I said I'd like that, using a tone of casual politeness that felt like a lie. I walked back to my studio, the bell over the coffee shop door tinkling behind me, feeling unmoored, as if the city I knew so well had suddenly rearranged itself. The past wasn't past. It was a living thing, and it had just walked up and ordered a latte. For the next few days, I was jumpy, my phone a constant source of anxiety and anticipation. Every buzz in my pocket sent a surge of adrenaline through me. I told myself it was ridiculous. I was 30 years old, a grown man, but I felt like a teenager again, waiting for a call that might never come. He called on a Thursday night. His voice was strained. Chloe had broken up with him. It was sudden, he said, but not surprising. They had been drifting for months, the distance and his work schedule acting like a slow-acting poison. He didn't sound heartbroken, just empty. He was rambling, talking more to himself than to me, trying to piece it all together out loud. And then he paused, and in a voice so small it was almost a whisper, he asked a question that would change everything. Hey, I know this is weird, and we haven't seen each other in forever, but can I come over? I just really don't want to be alone right now. This was the catalyst. This was the moment the ground began to shift beneath my feet. It wasn't a grand, dramatic earthquake, but a subtle, deep tremor that signaled the beginning of a tectonic realignment. My carefully constructed life, my quiet, orderly fortress, was about to be breached. And the most terrifying part was that I was the one who was going to open the gate. I heard the loneliness in his voice, a raw, unguarded need that cut through 13 years of silence. It was the same need I had sensed in him all those years ago, the quiet exhaustion he used to bring to my childhood bedroom. He needed a harbor, and against all my better judgment, against every instinct for self-preservation I had honed over the years, I heard myself say yes. He arrived an hour later, looking smaller than I remembered, his usual confidence stripped away, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He was holding a 6-pack of beer like a shield. We didn't talk about Chloe, not really. We talked about high school, about old teachers and stupid pranks. We talked about movies and music. We fell back into the easy rhythm of our old friendship as if the intervening 13 years had been nothing more than a long weekend. It was comfortable. It was dangerous. I was acutely aware of him, of his presence filling my space. My apartment, which had always felt like a perfect extension of myself, suddenly felt like a stage set for a play I didn't have the script for. He sat on one end of my large, worn leather couch, and I sat on the other, a careful 3 feet of space between us. But as the night wore on and the beer dwindled, the space began to shrink. He shifted, turning to face me, one leg tucked under him. I found myself mirroring him. The conversation slowed, the silences between our words growing longer, but they weren't awkward. They were the old silences, the comfortable ones, filled with a low hum of shared understanding. At some point, he stretched, his arm extending along the back of the sofa, his fingers brushing against my shoulder. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to my core. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I let it rest there, a warm, heavy weight that felt both terrifying and deeply right. He fell asleep first. His head started to nod, his words slurring slightly, until finally, his body gave in. His head drooped, landing softly on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. I held my breath, every nerve ending firing at once. He was asleep, I told myself. It didn't mean anything. It was just gravity. But my heart was pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm against my ribs. He was warm and heavy, and he smelled of beer and something that was just intrinsically, achingly Leo. I sat there for what felt like hours, a living statue, terrified to move, to breathe, to do anything that might wake him. The city lights cast long shadows across my living room, and in the quiet, with the weight of his head on my shoulder, it felt like no time had passed at all. I was 17 again, sitting in the dark, my world tilted on its axis by the boy sleeping next to me. That night was the beginning of the ritual. It started innocently enough. A week later, he texted me. "Long day. Need to decompress. Your couch still open for business." He came over with takeout, and we watched a movie. And again, he fell asleep, this time stretching out, his head ending up in my lap. I spent the entire 2-hour runtime of a critically acclaimed drama staring not at the screen, but at the way a stray lock of his hair fell across his forehead, my fingers itching with the desire to brush it back. I didn't. I just let him sleep, my hand resting on the cushion inches from his face, a silent, unmoving guardian. It became our thing. 2 or 3 nights a week, he would appear at my door, looking drained and weary from his high-pressure job. My apartment became his sanctuary, his decompression chamber. We wouldn't always talk much. Sometimes we'd just put on music and I'd work on editing photos while he read or scrolled through his phone. But we were together, sharing the same space, the same quiet air. And almost every time, it would end with him falling asleep on the couch. The pretense of watching a movie or having a final beer was just that, a pretense. What he was seeking was not entertainment or conversation. He was seeking proximity. He was seeking a specific kind of quiet, a specific kind of peace that, for some reason, he could only find with me. The geography of our cuddling, because that's what it was, even if we never called it that, evolved slowly, a cautious, unspoken negotiation. From his head on my shoulder, it progressed to his head in my lap. Then came the night he stretched out fully, pulling a throw blanket over both of us and tucking his head into the space between my chest and my shoulder, one arm thrown casually across my stomach. Each new step was a fresh hell of overanalysis for me. My mind would race, turning every gesture over and over, examining it from every angle. Was this just what friends did? Was he so starved for simple human comfort that he didn't care where it came from? Or did it mean more? Was he, in his own unconscious way, reaching for what we had almost touched all those years ago? I lived in a state of suspended animation, a constant, low-grade anxiety mixed with a yearning so profound it felt like a physical ache in my bones. I was terrified of making a wrong move, of misinterpreting the signals and shattering this fragile, beautiful, confusing thing we were building. To him, it might have been nothing more than a comfortable place to crash. He had plausible deniability on his side. He was always tired. He was lonely after his breakup. He'd had a few beers. There were 1,000 rational explanations that had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with us. But to me, it was everything. It was a lifeline. Having him there, sleeping beside me, was a quiet kind of bliss that made the loneliness of my own life feel less sharp, less absolute. I became a student of his sleep. I learned the subtle shift in his breathing as he moved from light rest into a deep slumber. I learned that he sometimes mumbled fragments of words related to work, deadlines, presentations, client names. I learned that he always seemed to find me, even in sleep. If I shifted slightly, trying to get more comfortable, he would murmur and unconsciously move closer, his hand perhaps finding my arm, his face burrowing deeper into my side. These were the moments that undid me. These were the moments that made it impossible to believe this was just about friendship. In sleep, his body seemed to be telling a truth his conscious mind was not yet ready to acknowledge. One night, the ritual took another turn. We were watching some mindless action movie, the sound of explosions filling the room. He was already half asleep against me, his body a warm, solid weight. The movie ended, the credits rolled, and the room fell silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft sound of his breathing. I should have woken him up. I should have told him to go home, or at the very least, to move to the spare bedroom I kept for guests. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The thought of disturbing the peace of that moment, of breaking the connection, was unbearable. So I just sat there, my arm going numb under his weight, until my own eyes grew heavy. I woke up hours later, sometime in the deep, silent part of the night. The blue light of dawn was just beginning to touch the edges of the window blinds. I was no longer sitting up. At some point, we had both shifted, sliding down until we were lying on the couch, tangled together under the throw blanket. I was on my back, and he was curled on his side, his face pressed against my chest, his arm draped possessively over me. His legs were intertwined with mine. It was the most intimate position I had ever been in with another person, and it had happened while we were both unconscious. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm, and I could feel the echo of it in his body. For a long moment, I just lay there, soaking in the impossible reality of it. This felt more real, more honest, than any waking moment we had shared. This felt like home. I carefully, slowly, extricated myself, my muscles protesting the cramped position. He stirred but didn't wake. I stood over him for a moment, looking at his face in the dim light. He looked younger in sleep, the lines of stress and weariness smoothed away. He looked like the boy I had known, the boy I had loved with all the fierce, uncomplicated purity of a 17-year-old heart. I went to the spare room and pulled the duvet off the bed, returning to the living room to gently cover him with it. He sighed in his sleep and curled into the warmth. I retreated to my own bedroom, my mind a chaotic storm of hope and fear. The couch was no longer just a piece of furniture. It had become a vessel, a sacred space where the unspoken was allowed to exist. But it was also a boundary, and I had no idea how, or if, we would ever cross it. The tension that had been building for weeks, a slow, gathering pressure like a storm front moving in off the ocean, finally broke on a rainy Saturday night. The weather was miserable, a cold, persistent drizzle that had been falling since morning, turning the city into a watercolor painting of gray and smeared light. Leo had come over early, ostensibly to help me build a new set of shelves for my studio, but we had abandoned the project after an hour in favor of ordering pizza and opening a bottle of wine. The rain beat a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the large windows of my apartment, isolating us from the rest of the world, creating a cocoon of warmth and quiet intimacy. We ended up on the couch, as we always did, but this time felt different. The air was charged, humming with an unspoken energy. We weren't watching a movie. The television was off. We were just talking, our voices low, the conversation meandering from his frustrations at work to my excitement about a new photography series I was planning. He was sitting closer than usual, our thighs pressed together from hip to knee. He had his wine glass in one hand, and the other was resting on the cushion between us, his fingers just an inch from my own. I was hyper-aware of that inch. It felt like a mile-wide canyon, a vast, empty space filled with everything we had never said. He fell silent in the middle of a sentence, his gaze dropping from my face to the space between us. He stared at our hands, so close to touching, and I saw his throat work as he swallowed. The silence stretched, no longer comfortable, but fraught with a delicate, shimmering tension. I could hear my own heartbeat, a loud, insistent drum in the quiet room. This was it. This was a crossroads, a precipice. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that whatever happened next would change everything. The ritual of our nights together had led us to this single, unscripted moment. He put his wine glass down on the coffee table with a soft click. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring at our hands. Then, slowly, tentatively, he moved his hand, closing that final inch of space. His pinky finger brushed against mine. It was the smallest of gestures, but it felt like a seismic event. A current of heat shot up my arm, and I had to force myself to keep breathing. He didn't pull away. He let his finger rest there, a silent question. I could have moved my hand. I could have broken the contact, retreated to the safety of ambiguity. But I was so tired of being safe. I was so tired of living in the hallway outside the closed door. I turned my hand over, palm up, an invitation. He finally lifted his eyes to mine. His expression was raw, vulnerable, stripped of all pretense. I saw fear there, Yes, but I also saw a deep, aching loneliness, and beneath it, a flicker of the same desperate hope that was raging inside me. He took a shaky breath and slid his fingers between mine, lacing our hands together. His palm was warm, slightly damp, his grip uncertain at first, then firming with a kind of quiet resolution. We just sat there for a long moment, our hands clasped together on the leather cushion, the rain pattering against the glass, the only two people in the world. He was the one who spoke first. His voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible over the sound of the rain. Julian. I just looked at him, unable to form a word. My name in his mouth sounded like a plea. He wet his lips, his gaze searching my face, looking for permission, for reassurance, for a sign that he wasn't about to shatter everything. Is this okay? It was the question I had been simultaneously dreading and longing to hear for months. It was the question that acknowledged the line we were standing on. It was the question that gave me all the power and all the responsibility. I could have said no. I could have preserved the friendship, salvaged the comfortable status quo. But looking at him, at the undisguised need in his eyes, I knew that the status quo was a lie. We had been moving toward this moment since he walked back into my life in that coffee shop. Maybe we had been moving toward it for 13 years. I squeezed his hand, a small, affirmative pressure. My own voice, when I finally found it, was just as quiet as his. Yes, that single word hung in the air between us, a fragile, luminous thing. A weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a wave of relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness. He brought our joined hands up, lifting them from the cushion, and he looked down at them as if he had never seen such a thing before. He traced the lines of my knuckles with his thumb, a slow, deliberate caress that sent shivers through me. He leaned in. He moved with the same agonizing slowness as he had in the car all those years ago, his eyes never leaving mine. This wasn't a dare. This wasn't an impulse. This was a choice, a conscious, deliberate act. He was giving me every chance to stop him, to turn my head, to say no. But all I could do was watch him come closer, my entire being focused on the space between our lips, a space that was rapidly disappearing. When he finally kissed me, it was nothing like the first time. That first kiss had been a spark in the dark, a flash of lightning, brief, shocking, and quickly gone. This was different. This was like the slow, inexorable rising of the sun. It was impossibly gentle, a soft, hesitant pressure that was more of a question than a statement. It was a confession. It was an apology. It was 13 years of unspoken things finally finding a voice. I felt a tremor run through him as my lips responded to his, as I kissed him back with all the pent-up longing I had kept locked away for half my life. The kiss deepened, but it never lost its tenderness, its sense of discovery. It was a kiss of homecoming. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, our hands still tightly clasped between us. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside my apartment, the storm had finally broken. The aftermath was not the explosion of clarity I had anticipated. It was, instead, a descent into a fog of confusion, a quiet, bewildering retreat. In the immediate moments after the kiss, everything had felt right, inevitable. We didn't speak. We simply held each other on the couch, the earlier tension replaced by a profound, peaceful stillness. He eventually fell asleep in my arms, a real, trusting sleep, and I held him until the rain stopped and the first gray light of morning filtered into the room. It felt like a beginning. It felt like a promise. I was wrong. He left that morning with a hurried, mumbled excuse about an early conference call he had forgotten. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The easy intimacy of the night before had evaporated, replaced by a brittle, awkward tension. He grabbed his jacket, gave me a tight, unconvincing smile, and was gone before I could say anything. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence he left in his wake was heavier, more profound, than any I had ever known in that apartment. It was a silence filled with the ghost of his presence and the deafening clamor of my own anxieties. He didn't text. He didn't call. Monday passed. Then Tuesday. The ritual was broken. The nights he would have spent on my couch were now vast, empty stretches of time that I filled with nervous energy, pacing my apartment, checking my phone, my mind a relentless engine of self-doubt. I replayed the kiss over and over, analyzing every detail, searching for the moment I had misread everything. Had I been too eager? Had I imagined the tenderness, the relief in his eyes? Had it all just been a moment of weakness for him, a product of wine and loneliness and a rainy night, a mistake he now deeply regretted? The old fear, the one I had lived with at 17, came roaring back. I had risked the friendship, and I had lost. I had disturbed the ecosystem, and now I was left with a barren, silent landscape. By Thursday, the anxiety had curdled into a cold, hard knot of anger and hurt. I was angry at him for his cowardice, for pulling me into this emotional vortex only to disappear. But mostly, I was angry at myself for allowing myself to hope, for believing, even for a moment, that this time could be different. I had let him use my home as his harbor, my presence as his comfort, and in return, he had left me shipwrecked. I couldn't let it end like this, in a miserable, unanswered silence. I deserved more than that. The friendship we had, both past and present, deserved more than a ghosting. I needed to hear it from him, whatever it was. I needed the finality of an explanation, even if it was one that would break my heart. I found him at a downtown bar, one of those soulless, corporate places with dark wood and muted televisions showing sports scores. He was with a group of people from his work, but he was not a part of their loud, cheerful circle. He stood slightly apart, staring into a glass of whiskey, a deep, weary frown etched on his face. He looked more alone in that crowd than he ever had on my couch. When he saw me approaching, a look of pure, unadulterated panic flashed across his face. He quickly made an excuse to his colleagues and met me by the door. "What are you doing here, Julian?" His voice was sharp, defensive. He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on a point over my shoulder. The public setting, his closed-off posture, it was all armor. "We need to talk, Leo. You can't do that. You can't kiss me like that, and then just disappear. I'm sorry. I've been slammed with work." It was a pathetic excuse, and we both knew it. It was an insult to my intelligence, to everything we had shared. A cold wave of clarity washed over me. I wasn't going to let him hide. "Don't lie to me. Not about this. Tell me it was a mistake. Tell me you were drunk. Tell me you regret it. Just tell me something real, for once." My voice was low but shaking with a furious energy. A few people at a nearby table glanced over. Leo flinched, finally looking at me, and I saw the turmoil in his eyes. He looked like a trapped animal. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me outside into the cold night air. The street was noisy with traffic and the sounds of the city, but it felt more private than the crowded bar. "I don't know, okay?" He finally burst out, his voice cracking with a frustration that seemed directed more at himself than at me. He let go of my arm and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure desperation. "I don't know what I'm doing." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the first honest thing he had said since he'd fled my apartment. The anger in me subsided slightly, replaced by a familiar, weary ache. What did it mean, Leo? The kiss. Our nights. What has this all been about? He leaned against the brick wall of the building, the fight draining out of him. He looked utterly exhausted. It meant it felt safe. He said, his voice barely a whisper. "Being with you. It's the only time in years that I've felt still. My whole life is motion, Julian. Airports, hotels, new clients, new problems to solve. I'm always performing, always on. With you, I could just stop. I could just be." "And the kiss?" I pressed, my heart hammering. He shook his head, looking down at the pavement. "I don't know. It felt right. It felt more right than anything has in a very long time. And that scares the hell out of me. Because I don't know what it means for me. For my life. For who I thought I was. All I know is that after it happened, I woke up and I panicked. It was like I had walked through a door and I had no idea what was on the other side. So I just ran back out and slammed it shut." His confession was a tangled mess of fear and confusion, but within it, I heard what I needed to hear. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't regret. It was fear. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. He was running from a truth that threatened to upend the carefully constructed, if unsatisfying, life he had built. My anger dissolved completely, replaced by a wave of profound, heartbreaking empathy. He was just as lost as I was. So you were just going to leave me in the dark? You were just going to let me think I had imagined it all? That it meant nothing? No. Yes. I don't know. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I'm sorry, Julian. I'm so sorry. I'm a coward. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. I took a step closer to him. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and I could see the genuine anguish there. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was a deep, protective instinct. I wanted to shield him from the world, from his own fears. I wanted to take him back to my couch and let him sleep for a week. You don't have to have all the answers right now, Leo. But you have to stop running. You have to talk to me. Hiding isn't going to make this go away. We crossed a line. We can't uncross it. So we have to figure out what's on the other side, together. He stared at me, a long, searching look. I held his gaze, letting him see the honesty in my own eyes, letting him see that I wasn't going to break, that I wasn't going to let him push me away out of his own fear. I was offering him a choice, the terrifying uncertainty of moving forward, or the lonely certainty of his old life. The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of 13 years of history and a future that hung precariously in the balance. Finally, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a promise. But it was a start. It was an agreement to stop running. It was the first step back toward the door he had slammed shut, a tentative willingness to see what lay on the other side. The conversation that followed our confrontation was not a single, cathartic event, but a series of small, hesitant talks over the next few days. We didn't go back to my apartment right away. The couch felt too loaded, too symbolic. Instead, we met on neutral ground, a quiet park bench, a late-night diner, long walks along the river with no particular destination. It was during these walks that the walls he had thrown up began to crumble, not in a great crash, but brick by painful brick. He talked about the immense pressure he had been under for years, the pressure to follow a certain path after his swimming career ended. He had chosen a life that looked successful on paper, a life that was stable and impressive, but it was a life that was slowly hollowing him out. He confessed that his relationship with Chloe had been more about comfort and companionship than passion, a way to fend off the crushing loneliness of his transient lifestyle. He admitted that being with me felt like stepping back into a version of himself he thought he had lost, the boy who could be quiet, who didn't have to perform. He said that the kiss had terrified him because it felt more authentic than any part of the life he was currently living, and the implications of that authenticity were overwhelming. It meant acknowledging that the path he was on was the wrong one. It meant having the courage to change course, a prospect that was, for a man who had built his identity on control and forward momentum, profoundly frightening. I listened mostly. I didn't push or prod. I simply created a space for him to lay out his fears, to give voice to the confusion that had been choking him. I understood. I understood the terror of vulnerability, the instinct to retreat to what is known, even if what is known is a source of pain. I had spent years doing it myself. The turning point came on a Sunday afternoon. He called and asked if he could come over. When I opened the door, he wasn't holding a six-pack of beer or a box of takeout. He was just holding himself, his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders slumped with a kind of weary resignation. He looked at me, his eyes clear and direct for the first time in over a week. Can we just sit? We sat on the couch, the infamous couch, but this time we sat like we had that first night, with a respectable, deliberate space between us. For a long time, we didn't speak. The silence was different now. It wasn't the comfortable, sleepy silence of our ritual, nor was it the strained, anxious silence of the aftermath. It was a thoughtful, contemplative silence. It was the quiet of two people who had finally laid all their cards on the table and were now just looking at the hand they had been dealt. He was the one who broke it. I'm tired of running, Julian. He said it to the room, not to me, his gaze fixed on the window. I've spent my whole adult life chasing something. A promotion, a bigger contract, a more impressive title. I think I was trying to outrun the feeling that I had failed when I lost swimming. I built this whole other person, this consultant. And I think I forgot who Leo was. Or maybe I was just too scared to look. Being here, with you, it's like a mirror. You see the person I was, and the person I think I still am, somewhere underneath all the bullshit. He turned to me then, and the look on his face was one of heartbreaking sincerity. I am so sorry for how I treated you. For disappearing. It was cowardly, and it was unfair. You've been nothing but a safe place for me since the day I walked back into your life. And I repaid that by making you feel unsafe. I was scared. I was scared of what I felt when I kissed you. Because it wasn't just about feeling safe anymore. It was about wanting. And I haven't let myself just want something for myself in a very long time. My breath hitched. It was the word I had been waiting to hear. The one that validated everything I had dared to hope. Wanting. It was active. It was intentional. It was more than just a passive need for comfort. What do you want, Leo? I asked, my voice soft. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. A small, sad smile touched his lips. I want to learn how to be still. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not in motion. And I want to do that with you. If you'll let me. I don't know what this is or where it's going. I can't promise you a perfect, easy road. I'm a mess. But I don't want to run away from it anymore. I want to stay. Stay? It was the most beautiful word I had ever heard. It was the opposite of the life he had been living. It was an anchor. It was a commitment to the terrifying, wonderful uncertainty of us. I felt a slow, warm wave of relief wash over me, so powerful it almost brought tears to my eyes. The anxiety I had been living with for weeks, for months, for 13 years, finally receded, leaving behind a quiet, peaceful shore. I closed the space between us on the couch. I took his hand, lacing our fingers together. It felt natural, right? There was no hesitation this time, no uncertainty. Okay, let's stay. That was the true beginning. Not the first kiss, or the second, but this quiet moment of mutual decision, of choosing to face the fear together. We were no longer defined by a ritual born of unspoken needs, but by a conscious choice to build something new, something honest. The ambiguity that had been both a comfort and a torment was finally gone, replaced by the clear, steady light of intention. The days and weeks that followed were a process of gentle rediscovery. We were learning a new language, the language of an intentional us. The couch was still our place, but its meaning had transformed. The cuddling was no longer a half-conscious act shrouded in plausible deniability. It was a deliberate expression of affection. He would pull me close while we watched a movie, and I would rest my head on his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart. And there was no fear, no overanalysis, only a profound sense of peace. He started leaving things at my apartment: a toothbrush, a change of clothes, his favorite coffee mug. Each small object was a quiet declaration, another brick in the foundation of the life we were building. The spare room door remained closed. He never slept there. He slept with me, in my bed, his body a warm, solid presence in the night. Sometimes we talked for hours in the dark. Other times, we just held each other, the silence a comfortable blanket woven from trust and acceptance. He began to change. The transformation was subtle at first, then more pronounced. He started saying no to work trips, delegating more, setting boundaries he had never dared to set before. He was actively choosing stillness, choosing to be present. I would watch him sitting in my armchair, reading a book in a patch of afternoon sunlight, and the restless energy that had always defined him was gone, replaced by a deep, settled calm. He looked at peace. He looked like he was finally home, and I found my own changes mirrored in his. The walls of my own fortress, the ones I had so carefully maintained, began to come down. I found myself sharing my fears, my insecurities, the parts of my inner world I had always kept hidden. With him, vulnerability wasn't a risk, it was a relief. He held my confessions with a gentle, non-judgmental care that made me feel seen in a way I had never been before. We were healing each other, filling in the empty spaces we had both been carrying for so long. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I found him in my kitchen, wearing an old t-shirt of mine, moving with a familiar ease as he poured 2 mugs. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He turned and smiled at me, a simple, easy, genuine smile. It was a scene of such profound, gentle domesticity that it stole my breath. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic movie moments. There was just this quiet, beautiful, ordinary morning. He handed me a mug, his fingers brushing against mine. Morning, morning. That was all. But in that simple exchange, in the shared warmth of the coffee mugs and the soft morning light, was everything. It was the promise of more mornings just like this. It was the peaceful certainty of a shared life. It was the resolution, not of a conflict, but of a long, slow journey back to each other. We learn, eventually, that some doors are not meant to stay closed forever. They are simply waiting for the right moment, for the right person to turn the key. Leo had been a ghost in the hallways of my memory for so long, a story I thought was finished. But he was never an ending. He was just a long, quiet pause. He was the key I hadn't known I was missing. We had found each other at 17 in a moment of confused, impulsive truth, and we had lost each other to the fear that followed. But life, in its strange and winding way, had given us a second chance, a chance to be braver, to be more honest, to choose each other not in the reckless dark of a summer night, but in the clear, steady light of day. And in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, we began to build our home.